welcome to The Explainer. Let's just jump right in, shall we? Today, we're unpacking a seriously revealing post-election interview with One Nation leader Pauline Hanson. Our goal here? To objectively break down her platform and political strategy exactly as she laid it out. Look, right now, all over the globe, we are seeing populist movements completely rewrite the rulebook on political campaigns and voter mobilization. And honestly, Australian is no exception. So no matter where you sit politically, understanding the mechanics behind this messaging, who they're targeting, and how they're framing their policies is absolutely crucial for making sense of today's political landscape. We're sticking strictly to the source material from this interview to map out exactly how One Nation is positioning itself and why this strategy is turning so many heads. To get you the core insights as efficiently as possible, we've broken this massive interview down into 5 key pieces. We'll look at number 1, their recent lower house victory. 2, the populist narrative they're building. 3, their laser focus on regional and rural areas. 4, unpacking those key politic proposals. And finally, number 5, their future ambitions. We've got a lot of fascinating ground to cover, so let's get to it. Starting with Part 1, a lower house victory, and breaking the 30-year barrier. Let's look at the actual catalyst for this entire interview. The discussion kicks off in really high spirits as Hanson celebrates their candidate, David Farley, winning a lower house seat in Farah. Now, what's super interesting here is how she frames this win. She doesn't just see it as picking up an isolated seat. No, she paints it as finally smashing through a massive psychological barrier after 30 years of heavy criticism. You see, for 3 decades, the conventional wisdom from her critics was that One Nation was strictly a Senate-only phenomenon, basically stuck in the upper house and completely unable to win on the ground in local electorates. So Hanson uses this specific lower house win as a direct, tangible rebuke to the major parties that she claims have grown arrogant and literally take everyday voters for granted. Which brings us to Part 2, the populist narrative, the establishment versus the base. This section really reveals the absolute core of One Nation's messaging. And honestly, it's a textbook example of political framing. The friction you feel throughout this whole interview is built on a very deliberate, constant juxtaposition. On one side, you've got what they call the uniparty establishment. This is a classic populist move, taking completely disparate opponents like the Liberals, Labour, and major media outlets like the ABC and Nine Papers, and just tossing them all into one giant bucket labeled the arrogant elite. It creates this massive, single monolith to fight against. Then on the other side, Hanson strategically places her base. Your down-to-earth, common-sense Australians, hardworking farmers, and, interestingly, proud migrants. It's an incredibly effective anti-establishment frame, designed to rally frustrated voters against a system that supposedly looks down on them. To really highlight the kind of intense pushback Hanson faces, the host actually reads a headline from the Nine Papers right to her. It says, "Australia teeters on the brink of a populist uprising led by a longtime racist." This is a pivotal moment in the interview. It shows the fierce, unyielding media criticism directed at her, framing her movement as this dangerous, racially motivated uprising. But politically speaking, that kind of extreme establishment condemnation is exactly the fuel an outsider narrative needs. It sets Hanson up perfectly to play the role of the everyday defender taking on a hostile, out-of-touch system. So how does she handle that highly specific attack? She doesn't just brush it off. She completely rejects it by pointing directly to the people standing right beside her. She passionately argues that many of her most fiercely loyal supporters are actually migrants from diverse backgrounds. She even shares an anecdote, saying these migrants tell her they back her policies because they fled broken systems overseas and they desperately do not want Australia to turn into the places they left. By leaning into this diverse, patriotic base, she's essentially painting her media critics as these isolated elites who have absolutely no idea what everyday Australians are actually thinking. To cement this anti-establishment vibe even further, the interview lists out specific allegations of what Hanson calls dirty campaign tactics over in Farah. Get it loaded this evidence she presents. She accuses Labour of having to physically bus in paid union reps just to man the polling booths. She claims the Teal Independents were dropping serious cash, paying guards $30 an hour, literally just to stand there and watch their political signs. And she goes hard after the Liberals for using what she blatantly calls gutter politics, bringing up an incident where they allegedly filmed a pensioner without their consent. Put it all together, and the narrative she's pushing is crystal clear. The major players are terrified, and they're resorting to desperate, expensive, and underhanded tricks because they're losing their grip. All right, let's move to Part 3, regional and rural focus, courting the heartland. As you listen, it becomes glaringly obvious that One Nation is unapologetically laser-focused on rural and mining communities. They firmly argue these areas have been totally abandoned by the city-centric policies of the major parties. Hanson lays out a super practical two-step roadmap for her agenda here. Step 1, rolling out her gas policy. And she shares a really telling story, noting that she actually sat down and consulted directly with the gas companies themselves. According to her, these companies are practically in shock because apparently no politician ever bothers to ask for their input before writing the laws. Then, step 2 is going straight to the agricultural sector, looking farmers in the eye and asking them exactly what they need to survive. Her aggressive stated goal here is to slash red tape, green tape, and what she calls black tape, referring to indigenous heritage bureaucracies, just to get these stalled industries moving again. Now, to actually reach these massive, isolated regional areas, Hanson casually mentions she relies on a campaign plane. And the source material proudly gives a shout-out to billionaire Gina Reinhart for providing this logistical support. This is a fascinating dynamic. Hanson fiercely defends Reinhart against what Australians call tall poppy syndrome, that tendency to tear down highly successful people. Hanson totally flips the script on this billionaire backing. She doesn't frame it as elitism at all. She frames it as patriotic philanthropy. She points out Reinhardt's massive financial support for veterans, the Royal Flying Doctor Service, and Australian Olympians, basically painting her as a hero of the working class and regional Australia. Okay, part 4, key policy proposals, specifically looking at their economic and healthcare blueprints. Let's logically unpack the rapid-fire policy list Hanson pitches to the hosts, and we'll start with the regional healthcare crisis. This number right here is huge. It represents a highly specific, major claim. Hanson says she's been meeting extensively with doctors and medical groups who have handed her a concrete plan to deliver 600 weeks of visiting doctors to rural and regional areas. Just pause and think about the real-world impact of that. For a struggling country town that hasn't seen a local doctor in months, that kind of dedicated rotation is an absolute game-changer. It's a very targeted, numbers-driven promise aimed right at communities that are dealing with the terrifying reality of closed hospitals and zero access to basic health care. And here is how she plans to structurally make that happen. To actually fund this rural access, Hanson proposes a pretty radical shift, entirely stripping funding control away from the state governments. Instead, she wants to create completely independent hospital boards that control their own local funding. It's a really stark contrast she's drawing. She's pitting sluggish, centralized state health departments against her idea of fast, agile, localized boards that cut out the red tape to deliver care right where people need it most. And to justify cutting out those state governments, she drops an absolute bombshell of a number. She claims there are 2.5 million bureaucrats operating across all levels of Australian government right now. And the cost? A staggering $250 billion a year. I mean, this is the ultimate populist talking point, delivered with maximum punch. By pointing at this massive, faceless enemy, the bureaucrats, she offers a really simple explanation for the country's financial problems. Her solution? Axe the bureaucrats, stop the massive financial bleed, and put common-sense people in charge of the decisions. When the conversation pivots to housing and the economy, we see a fascinating dual strategy that really warrants a closer look. On the one hand, she goes completely on the offensive against outsiders, targeting foreign investors and mass migration, blaming them squarely for the housing crisis. But at the exact same time, she is fiercely protective of local, middle-class wealth building. She strongly defends negative gearing for up to 2 or 3 homes. Her argument is that this isn't some tax loophole for mega developers. It's a vital tool for aspirational locals. Think everyday nurses and doctors who are just trying to build their own private retirement nest egg. It's a very clever psychological play, validating local ambition while shutting the door on external pressures. From there, Hanson groups together some sweeping, incredibly aggressive economic cuts. She points out that taxes currently make up a punishing 40 to 44% of a new home build, and she promises to scrap those entirely, along with totally abolishing the capital gains tax. But the most radical move? She bluntly states she would slash and burn the NDIS, the National Disability Insurance Scheme. Now, the NDIS is a massive, deeply embedded social safety net in Australia, even though its budget has been ballooning. Promising to slash and burn a program this sensitive is a highly controversial stance, but she ties it right back to her alternative budget, claiming she's already pinpointed exactly $90 billion in hard government spending cuts.
So what's the actual pitch to the average voter's wallet with all these billions in savings? Well, retail politics is all about tangible numbers, not vague ideas. Hanson pitches an income-splitting policy for single-income families with a dependent child. She claims very explicitly that under her exact math, a single-income household earning $120,000 a year would save exactly $10,000 annually. That is a direct, mathematically calculated appeal aimed straight at traditional families who are feeling totally crushed by the day-to-day cost of living right now.
Finally, to boost workforce participation without relying on the mass migration she opposes, she pitches allowing pensioners and veterans to work absolutely unlimited hours. The kicker here, and this is crucial, is her promise that they wouldn't lose a single cent of their pension or lose access to their healthcare cards. She uses highly emotive language, saying this policy would stop throwing experienced people on the scrap heap. It's a phrase perfectly engineered for maximum emotional impact, connecting instantly with older folks who feel sidelined by the modern economy, giving them a way to socialize and earn some much-needed extra cash. Which brings us to a final section, Part 5, Future Ambitions and the Road Ahead. Let's look at how this highly revealing interview wraps up and what it signals for the future of Australian politics. The host hits her with a really critical question. Was this lower house victory the absolute peak for One Nation, or is it just the start of a massive political tsunami? Hanson flat out refuses to put a cap on her ambitions or guess a number of future seats. Instead, she pivots to a message of strict determination, signaling a major strategic shift. She admits she knows her own limitations and says her main goal right now is to surround herself with the right experts and a highly capable team to actually deliver this massive agenda. Why pivot from a solo populist to a team builder? Because it signals she smells blood in the water. She's moving from just disrupting the system to positioning her movement for actual legislative governance. It's a stark warning to the establishment. Do not underestimate what's coming next. As we wrap up this explainer, we really have to look at the whole board and ask the big question. We've seen the fully formed strategy, a highly energized base, a total rejection of the mainstream media narrative, and a highly specific policy roadmap aimed straight at struggling regions and the cost of living. So will this precise blueprint systematically disrupt the major parties long term, or is it just a fleeting shift in the political winds? That is the fascinating reality we get to watch unfold over the next election cycle. Thanks for joining me on The Explainer today, and remember, keep questioning everything you see.